The soft hum of the city was always comforting to me, a constant reminder that life moved forward no matter what. I'd often sit by the large bay window of our apartment, watching as the world below hustled and bustled, oblivious to the secrets that simmered just beneath the surface of my life. I'm Raleigh, just a regular guy, or so I thought. At 35, I had what many would consider a good life, a solid job in marketing, a comfortable home, and a wife, Sandy, who I'd been with for nearly a decade. We met in our 20s, during those carefree years when everything seemed possible and the world was ours for the taking. I remember being captivated by her smile, the way it lit up the room. She was everything I wanted, funny, smart, and just a bit mysterious. Sandy worked as a freelance graphic designer. She was creative, always coming up with something new, something vibrant that added color to our otherwise routine lives. Her work gave her the freedom to stay home or travel whenever she wanted, a flexibility that I admired, even envied at times. I was tied to the 9-to-5 grind, but I never minded much. After all, it was this job that paid for our little luxuries, the occasional trip, the fancy dinners, and her ever-growing collection of art supplies. Our relationship was solid, or at least that's what I told myself. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but we were in it together, or so I believed. We never had kids, a decision that was mutual. We loved the freedom, the spontaneity of our lives without the responsibility of a child tying us down. It was perfect, in a way. But looking back, I realized that something had started to change. It was subtle at first. Sandy would be on her phone more often, her laughter sounding forced when she talked to me. I chalked it up to work stress, or just one of those phases everyone goes through. We all have moments where we retreat into ourselves, right? I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, so I let it slide. Then there were the nights when she'd come home late, smelling of wine and perfume. "Just meeting some old friends," she'd say with a tired smile. I wanted to believe her, to trust her like I always had. But there was a gnawing feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. Maybe it was the way her eyes darted away when I asked her about her day, or how she seemed more distant, more closed off. Still, I kept quiet. I loved her, and I didn't want to see what might be lurking beneath the surface of those small changes. Ignorance is bliss, they say. And for a time, I was content to live in that bliss, even if it was just a facade. But deep down, I knew something was coming. I could feel it in the way the air around us seemed to thicken, in the silence that hung between our words. Something was waiting to explode, and I wasn't sure if we'd survive the blast. Work was my escape, a refuge from the unease that had started creeping into my life. I buried myself in projects, meetings, and the constant buzz of the office. My colleagues would joke that I was a workaholic, always the first in and the last to leave. But the truth was, I preferred the noise of the office to the quiet tension that now filled our apartment. Sandy's behavior continued to shift in small, almost imperceptible ways. She was more protective of her phone, keeping it close even when she was in the bathroom or taking a shower. Her once open, playful nature became guarded. The laughter we used to share, the inside jokes that only we understood, all seemed to fade away, replaced by a strange, uncomfortable silence. I tried to talk to her about it once. We were sitting in the living room, the TV droning on in the background, some mindless show neither of us was really watching. I turned to her, my heart pounding in my chest, and asked, "Is everything okay with us?" She looked at me, her eyes widening just a fraction before she forced a smile. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" Her tone was light, almost too casual, like she was trying to brush off the question. "I don't know," I replied, searching her face for any sign of the woman I fell in love with. "You just seem different lately." She laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves more than comforted me. It's just work, Raleigh. I've been swamped with projects, you know how it is. And that was it. The conversation ended before it even began. She turned back to the TV, and I sat there, feeling more alone than ever, the distance between us growing wider by the day. But the real blow came one evening when I came home early from work. I wanted to surprise Sandy, to maybe rekindle some of the spark that seemed to be dying. I even picked up her favorite takeout on the way back, imagining how her face would light up when she saw it. But when I walked into our apartment, she wasn't there. Instead, I found her phone on the kitchen counter, buzzing with a new message. I shouldn't have looked. I know that now. But curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced at the screen. It was a message from someone named Leonard, and the words that stared back at me made my blood run cold. Can't wait to see you tonight. Last time was amazing. Same place? My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment, I felt like the world had dropped out from under me. Leonard? Who the hell was Leonard? And what did he mean by last time? I wanted to confront her right then and there, but she wasn't home, so I waited. And as I sat there in the quiet, the weight of what I'd seen settled in, and I realized that the cracks in our relationship were deeper than I'd ever imagined. That night was the first time I truly felt the fear of losing her. But it was also the first time I understood that maybe I never really had her to begin with. The night seemed to drag on endlessly as I sat in the darkened living room, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. I couldn't stop replaying those words from Leonard's message in my mind. Can't wait to see you tonight. Last time was amazing. It was as if they were etched into my brain, each repetition twisting the knife a little deeper. When the sound of the front door opening finally broke the silence, I felt a rush of conflicting emotions: anger, fear, betrayal. Sandy walked in, her face flushed and her hair slightly tousled as if she'd been caught in a breeze. She smiled when she saw me, but there was something off about it, something forced. "Hey, you're home early," she said, setting her bag down on the kitchen counter. I couldn't bring myself to respond right away. I just watched her, trying to see through the facade, trying to understand who this woman was that had taken the place of the Sandy I thought I knew. She noticed my silence and turned to face me fully, her smile faltering. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly as I clutched the edge of the couch. "Who's Leonard?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression a mix of surprise and something else. Guilt, maybe. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Raleigh, she began, but I cut her off. "Don't lie to me, Sandy. Just tell me the truth. How long has this been going on?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "It's not what you think," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow, empty. "Not what I think?" I repeated, my voice rising with every word. "Then what is it, Sandy? What the hell is going on?" She finally looked at me, her eyes wet and pleading. "I never wanted to hurt you, Raleigh. I swear I didn't. But Leonard, he's different. I didn't plan for this to happen." I felt my chest tighten, the pain of her words cutting deeper than I thought possible. "How long?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then finally spoke, her voice trembling. 2 years. 2 years. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. 2 years of lies, of deceit, of her sneaking around behind my back. I felt sick, my stomach churning as the full weight of her betrayal settled over me. "So every time you said you were with friends every late night, it was all him?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Raleigh. I never wanted it to go this far. I never meant to fall in love with him." I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, the room spinning as I tried to process everything. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with everything, had been living a double life for 2 years, and she had the nerve to call it love. "Get out," I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. "Rolly, please." "I said get out," I yelled, my anger finally boiling over. "I can't even look at you right now." Sandy recoiled as if I'd struck her, then turned and fled the apartment, her sobs echoing through the hallway as the door slammed shut behind her. I stood there, alone in the dark, the silence of the apartment now suffocating. Everything I had known, everything I had believed in, was shattered in an instant, and as I sank back down onto the couch, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and loss, I realized that this was just the beginning of the nightmare. The hours after Sandy left were a blur. I don't remember much about that night, only that the apartment felt like a grave, cold and empty, a tomb filled with memories that now felt tainted. The shadows seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with the weight of my own thoughts. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this go on for 2 years without suspecting anything? My mind was a whirlwind of questions, none of which I could answer. I felt like I was spiraling, the ground beneath me giving way to a chasm of despair and rage. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning on the couch where I eventually passed out. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, Sandy and Leonard, wrapped up in each other's arms, laughing at my expense. It was a nightmare I couldn't escape, and it followed me into the morning, leaving me with a hollow ache that gnawed at my insides. When the sun finally rose, casting a pale light over the city, I dragged myself to the bathroom. My reflection in the mirror was almost unrecognizable, eyes bloodshot, stubble shadowing my jaw, and a numbness in my expression that scared me. It was as if part of me had died the moment Sandy walked out of that door, leaving behind a shell of the man I used to be. I didn't know what to do, where to go from here. I couldn't go to work, couldn't face the world as if everything was normal. So I called in sick, my voice hoarse and unconvincing, but I didn't care. Let them think what they wanted. My world had just crumbled and I couldn't pretend anymore. The apartment was too quiet, too still. Every corner seemed to whisper reminders of the life I thought I had. The photos on the wall, the little trinkets we'd collected over the years, they all felt like mocking relics of a love that was never really there. Desperation gnawed at me, and before I knew it, I found myself scrolling through Sandy's phone, which she'd left behind in her haste to leave. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, a part of me screaming that I shouldn't do this, that it would only hurt more. But I couldn't stop myself. Her messages with Leonard were all there, spanning back for months. Reading them felt like driving a knife into my heart, over and over again. The playful banter, the stolen moments, the plans they made to be together, they all painted a picture of a life she had lived without me, a life I was never a part of. There were photos, too. Intimate moments they had shared, moments that should have belonged to us, but were instead given to him. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and I had to force myself to keep reading, to dig deeper into the twisted reality I had been blind to. And then I found it, the address of a hotel, a place they had apparently frequented. The last message was from Leonard, confirming a meeting there just the night before, while I had been at home, oblivious. I should have stopped. I should have thrown the phone across the room and walked away. But something dark and cold had taken hold of me, something that refused to let go until I had seen it all, until I had uncovered every last detail of their betrayal. That's when the anger set in, a deep, burning rage that I hadn't felt before, even when I had first confronted Sandy. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was an insult, a slap in the face that I couldn't ignore. They had made a fool out of me, played me for a fool, and I couldn't let that go unanswered. I don't remember deciding to go to the hotel. All I knew was that I couldn't sit in that apartment any longer. I needed to see the place where it all happened, needed to understand how this had all come to pass. Maybe then I'd find some closure, or maybe I'd just find more pain. But I didn't care. I threw on some clothes, grabbed my keys, and headed out the door, the adrenaline coursing through me like a drug. I had no plan, no idea what I would do once I got there. All I knew was that I needed answers, and I wasn't going to stop until I had them. The city seemed different as I drove through it. Colder, more distant. I wasn't sure if it was because of what I'd learned or if something inside me had shifted, but I didn't recognize the world around me anymore. Everything felt off, like I was living in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. When I finally pulled up to the hotel, I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the entrance. It was an ordinary place, nothing special. But to me, it was a den of lies, a place where my marriage had been torn apart piece by piece. I felt my hands tighten around the steering wheel, the anger bubbling up inside me, pushing me to do something, anything. But what? What was I going to do? Confront Leonard? Confront Sandy? I had no idea. All I knew was that I needed to see it, needed to stand in the place where they had betrayed me. Maybe then I'd understand how everything had gone so wrong. Maybe then I'd figure out what to do next. I couldn't sit in the car any longer. The tension in my chest had become unbearable, a coiled spring ready to snap at any moment. So I pushed open the door, stepping out into the bright light of day, the contrast to the darkness inside me almost mocking. The hotel loomed in front of me, an unassuming building that now held a significance I could never have imagined. The lobby was quiet when I entered, the kind of sterile silence that accompanies mid-morning check-ins and the faint chatter of tourists discussing their plans. My heart pounded as I approached the front desk, the receptionist barely glancing up from her computer. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite, detached. I forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "Yeah, I'm supposed to meet someone. He's staying here. Leonard." I hesitated, realizing I didn't know his last name, a small detail that now felt like a gaping hole in my understanding of the man who had destroyed my life. The receptionist blinked at me, waiting. I scrambled to recover. "He's in room 312, I think. I might be a little early," I lied, hoping she wouldn't press for details. She gave me a curt nod and gestured to the elevators. "Third floor, sir?" I mumbled a thanks, my legs feeling like lead as I walked toward the elevators. The air felt thick, each breath a struggle as I tried to keep myself from unraveling completely. I wasn't sure what I would do once I got to his room, wasn't sure if I could handle seeing the face of the man who had taken everything from me. The elevator ride was torturously slow, each floor ticking by with an ominous chime that echoed in my ears. When I finally reached the third floor, I stepped out into the hallway, the plush carpet muffling my footsteps as I made my way to room 312. I paused in front of the door, my heart pounding in my chest, the reality of what I was about to do crashing down on me. What if he was there? What if she was with him? The thought made my stomach churn, the bile rising in my throat, but I couldn't back down now, not after everything I'd uncovered. I raised my hand to knock, hesitating for just a moment before I rapped my knuckles against the wood. The sound seemed to reverberate down the empty hallway, a prelude to the storm that was about to break. There was a pause, a moment of silence that stretched out painfully, before I heard movement on the other side. The door creaked open slightly, and a man's face appeared in the gap. He was older than I expected, with graying hair and a neatly trimmed beard, his expression one of mild annoyance. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice deep and calm, completely unaware of the chaos his mere presence had unleashed in my life. For a moment I couldn't speak, the words sticking in my throat as I stared at him. This was Leonard, the man who had been sleeping with my wife, the man who had been living a life I didn't even know existed. I felt the anger surge up again, hot and blinding, but I forced it down, trying to keep some semblance of control. "I'm Rolly," I finally said, my voice strained. "Sandy's husband." Recognition flashed in his eyes, quickly followed by a flicker of something else. Guilt, maybe? He stepped back, opening the door wider. "I think you should come in," he said quietly. I hesitated, a part of me wanting to turn and run to escape the reality of what was happening. But I knew there was no turning back now. So I stepped inside, the door closing softly behind me, sealing me in with the man who had shattered my world. The room was small, tidy, with an air of impersonal comfort typical of hotels. There was a chair near the window, and Leonard gestured for me to sit. I ignored the offer, remaining standing, my eyes fixed on him. "How long?" I asked, my voice cold. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "A little over 2 years," he said, his tone calm, almost resigned. I felt a fresh wave of nausea at the confirmation, my fists clenching at my sides. "Why?" Leonard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. We didn't plan for it to happen. But Sandy, she needed something that she wasn't getting from you, and I—" "Don't!" I interrupted, my voice trembling with rage. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You've been sleeping with my wife, lying to me, lying to her. And for what? A bit of excitement? A thrill?" "It was more than that," he said quietly, meeting my eyes. "It wasn't just about sex, Rolly. It was about connection, about finding something real." His words felt like a slap in the face, the hypocrisy of them almost too much to bear. "Something real?" I echoed, my voice thick with disgust. "You call sneaking around behind my back for 2 years something real?" "I know it sounds hollow," Leonard replied, his expression one of genuine regret. "And I'm sorry, truly I am. But I care about Sandy, and she cares about me." "You've destroyed everything," I said, my voice breaking as the weight of it all came crashing down. "You've ruined my life, and you expect me to just accept that?" Leonard didn't respond, and for a moment we just stood there in silence, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. I wanted to hit him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was done, and there was no going back. "Where is she?" I finally asked, the anger giving way to a deep, aching sadness. Leonard hesitated, then spoke softly. "She's staying with a friend. She didn't think it was right to go back to your place. Not after everything." I nodded, though it didn't make me feel any better. "And what now?" I asked, not really sure if I wanted to hear the answer. "I don't know," Leonard admitted. "But I think you both need time to figure out what you want, what's best for you." The words hung in the air, and I realized that he was right. As much as I hated him, as much as I wanted to blame him for everything, I knew that Sandy's betrayal wasn't just about him. It was about something deeper, something broken between us that I hadn't seen until it was too late. I turned to leave, the weight of what had happened pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. "This isn't over," I said quietly, not sure if I was speaking to Leonard or myself. "I know," he replied softly. And with that, I walked out of the room, the door clicking shut behind me, leaving me alone with the unbearable silence of what came next. The drive back to the apartment felt surreal, as if I were drifting through a nightmare that refused to end. The streets blurred past me, the world outside indifferent to the turmoil that churned inside my chest. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, but I barely noticed. My mind was somewhere else, trapped in that hotel room, replaying the conversation with Leonard over and over. He had been calm, almost too calm, as if he had accepted what they had done, as if it were something inevitable. But I couldn't accept it. I couldn't accept that my life had been torn apart by this man, this stranger who had somehow become the center of my wife's world. The anger that had flared up inside me in the hotel room hadn't dissipated. It had simply transformed into a cold, hard knot of bitterness that settled deep in my gut. When I finally reached the apartment, it was late afternoon. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room as I stepped inside. The silence that greeted me was oppressive, a stark contrast to the noise that filled my head. Everywhere I looked, I saw remnants of the life Sandy and I had shared. The photos on the wall, the books on the shelf, the small details that once brought me comfort, but now felt like a cruel joke. I wandered aimlessly through the apartment, each step echoing in the empty space. In the bedroom, I found one of Sandy's sweaters draped over a chair, her perfume still lingering in the fabric. The scent brought back a flood of memories. Late-night talks, lazy Sunday mornings, the way she used to smile at me when she thought I wasn't looking. All of it felt so distant now, like it belonged to someone else. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the weight of exhaustion finally catching up with me. For the first time since I'd discovered the affair, I allowed myself to really think about what had happened. Not just the betrayal, but everything that had led up to it. The nights I'd spent at the office, the times I'd brushed off her attempts to talk about our relationship, the moments when I'd taken her for granted. I'd always thought our marriage was strong enough to withstand anything. I'd thought that love was enough. But now, sitting alone in the bedroom that had once been ours, I realized how wrong I had been. We had drifted apart, slowly, imperceptibly, until the distance between us had grown too wide to bridge, and in that space, Leonard had found his way in. The realization didn't lessen the pain, it only deepened it. Because now I understood that I wasn't just angry at Sandy and Leonard. I was angry at myself, at my own blindness, my own complacency. I had let this happen. I had let my marriage crumble right in front of me, and I hadn't even noticed until it was too late. I reached for my phone, not really sure who I wanted to call. Sandy? What would I even say to her? I couldn't bear the thought of hearing her voice, not yet. The wound was too fresh, too raw. My parents, my friends, I wasn't ready for their pity, their advice on how to move on, how to pick up the pieces of my life. All I wanted was to make the pain stop, to find some way to numb the ache that gnawed at my insides. In the end, I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my entire life. The next few days passed in a blur. I called in sick again, using the same hollow excuse I'd given before, though I knew my boss probably didn't believe it. I didn't care. I spent most of my time in the apartment, unable to face the outside world, unable to muster the energy to do anything but exist. The days bled into each other, marked only by the occasional text message from Sandy, asking if I was okay, asking if we could talk. I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to talk to her, not yet. I wasn't sure if I ever would be. How could I talk to her when the mere thought of her with Leonard made my blood boil? How could I find the words to express the depth of my hurt, my anger, my betrayal? I didn't know if there were any words that could capture what I was feeling. It wasn't until the fourth day that I finally left the apartment. I couldn't take the isolation any longer. Couldn't bear to be surrounded by the memories that haunted every corner of the space. I needed to clear my head, to find some way to make sense of the mess my life had become. I ended up at a bar, a small, dimly lit place not far from my apartment. It was the kind of place where you could disappear into the background, where no one would ask questions or try to make conversation. I ordered a drink, then another, the alcohol burning a path down my throat, dulling the edge of my thoughts. I sat there for hours, lost in the haze of alcohol and bitterness, the noise of the bar fading into the background as I tried to drown out the images that kept flashing through my mind. Sandy and Leonard, the way she had looked at him, the way she had spoken about him. It was late by the time I finally stumbled out of the bar, the night air cold against my skin. I had no idea where I was going, only that I couldn't go back to the apartment, not yet. So I walked, the streets empty around me, the city a blur of lights and shadows. And as I walked, The reality of what had happened began to sink in, the full weight of it pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. Sandy was gone, and with her, the life I had known, the future I had imagined. I was alone, and I had no idea how to move forward from here. The days that followed were a haze of alcohol and self-destruction. I drifted from bar to bar, searching for oblivion at the bottom of every bottle, trying to escape the reality that had become my life. But no matter how much I drank, I couldn't drown the memories, couldn't forget the betrayal that gnawed at me like a festering wound. I avoided the apartment as much as possible, sleeping on a friend's couch when I could, or, more often than not, passing out in whatever bar I ended up in. My phone remained off, buried deep in my pocket, where I wouldn't be tempted to read any more of Sandy's messages. I wasn't ready to face her, wasn't ready to hear whatever excuses or explanations she might offer. I was barely holding it together as it was, but I knew I couldn't keep running forever. Eventually, I'd have to confront her, to deal with the mess our lives had become, and as much as I hated it, as much as I dreaded it, I knew that time was coming sooner rather than later. It was on a particularly cold, bleak afternoon that I found myself standing in front of the apartment building. I'd been walking aimlessly for hours, my thoughts a jumble of anger, sadness, and regret, when my feet somehow led me back here, to the place where everything had begun to unravel. I stared up at the windows, wondering if Sandy was inside, if she was waiting for me, hoping I'd come home so we could finally talk. A part of me wanted to turn around and walk away, to keep running until I couldn't feel anything anymore. But I was tired. Tired of the bars, tired of the endless nights, tired of avoiding the inevitable. So I took a deep breath and forced myself to climb the stairs, each step heavier than the last. The hallway was eerily quiet as I approached our apartment door. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob, hesitating for just a moment before I pushed it open. The familiar scent of home hit me like a punch to the gut, bringing with it a flood of memories, both good and bad. I stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind me, and found myself face to face with Sandy. She was sitting on the couch, her legs curled up beneath her, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying, and when she looked up at me, I saw a mix of relief and fear in her gaze. "Rolly," she whispered, setting the cup down and rising to her feet. "I didn't know if you'd come back." I stayed by the door, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I didn't know if I would either. She took a tentative step toward me, then stopped, as if unsure of how close she should get. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why did you?" I snapped, my anger flaring up despite my best efforts to keep it in check. "Why did you lie to me for 2 years? Why did you throw everything we had away?" Sandy flinched at the harshness of my tone, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was lonely, Rolly. You were always at work, always so busy, and I know that's no excuse, but Leonard, he made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't plan for it to happen, but once it did, I didn't know how to stop." Her words cut through me like a knife, the pain sharp and immediate. "So you just kept going? Kept lying to me? Kept seeing him, all while pretending like everything was fine?" "I didn't know how to tell you," she said, her tears spilling over now. "I was so scared of losing you, of losing everything we had. But the longer it went on, the more trapped I felt. I was terrified, Rolly. Terrified of what would happen if you found out, and terrified of what it meant if you didn't." I shook my head, struggling to make sense of it all. "So you just let it keep going. You let it go on, and now look where we are." She nodded, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I know I've ruined everything. I know you probably hate me, and I don't blame you if you do. But please, Rolly, I never stopped loving you. Even when I was with him, I never stopped loving you. I stared at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything in the world, now a stranger to me. How can you say that? I asked, my voice breaking. How can you say you loved me while you were sneaking around with him? How can you expect me to believe anything you say now? I don't expect you to believe me, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. But it's the truth. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Rolly. I don't deserve it. But I'm begging you to understand, to at least try to see that I never meant for this to happen. The room was thick with tension, the silence between us stretching out painfully. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to the mess of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to let out all the rage and hurt that had been building up since I found out. But another part of me, a quieter, more desperate part, wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to the love we once shared, even if it was just a shadow of what it used to be. Do you love him? I finally asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Sandy's eyes widened, and she shook her head fiercely. I don't know, she admitted, her voice raw. I don't know what I feel anymore, but I know that what I feel for you is different, stronger. I never wanted to leave you, Rolly. I still don't. I took a step back, the distance between us suddenly feeling like miles. I don't know if I can do this, Sandy. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. She nodded, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. I understand, and if you want me to leave, I will. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right, to try and rebuild what we had, if you'll give me that chance. I didn't respond, my mind a chaotic mess of conflicting emotions. I didn't know what I wanted, didn't know if there was even a path forward for us. But as I stood there, staring at the woman who had been my world, I realized that whatever happened next, it would be the hardest decision I'd ever have to make. The apartment felt stifling, the walls closing in as the weight of our conversations settled over me like a heavy blanket. Sandy's words hung in the air, each one a painful reminder of the betrayal that had shattered our lives. I wanted to scream, to yell, to let out the frustration and anger that had been simmering beneath the surface. But all I could do was stand there, numb and exhausted, as the reality of the situation pressed down on me. Sandy took a cautious step forward, her eyes pleading. Rolly, please. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never fully make up for, but if there's even the smallest part of you that still cares about us, about what we had, please, let's try to talk through this, even if it's just to say goodbye. The desperation in her voice was palpable, and despite everything, a small part of me still wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to make things right. But I couldn't. I didn't know how. The hurt was too fresh, the wounds too deep. I turned away, unable to meet her gaze any longer. What do you expect me to say, Sandy? That we can just pick up the pieces and move on like nothing happened? I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again, let alone be with you. I don't expect that, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't expect anything. But I'm asking for a chance, Rolly. A chance to at least try and fix what I've broken. Somehow rebuild the life we had once shared. But could we? Could I ever truly forgive her for what she'd done? Could I ever trust her again, knowing that she had been with another man, that she had betrayed me so completely? I don't know if I can do this, I admitted, my voice shaky. I don't know if I have it in me to forgive you, to try and move past this. How can I ever trust you again, Sandy? How can I ever believe anything you say? She stepped closer, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. I know it's a lot to ask, Rolly, and I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn it back, to show you that I'm committed to making this work, if you'll let me. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, the genuine remorse that made me want to believe her. to give her the chance she was asking for. But the fear of being hurt again, of opening myself up only to be betrayed once more, held me back. "I need time," I finally said, my voice hoarse. "I can't just jump back into this like nothing happened. I need time to figure out what I want, what we're even capable of after all this." She nodded, relief washing over her face. "Take all the time you need, Rolly. I'll be here, waiting, whenever you're ready to talk." The words should have brought me some comfort, but instead, they only added to the weight on my shoulders. I didn't know if time would heal these wounds, didn't know if I'd ever be ready to confront the reality of what had happened between us. But I couldn't deny that the thought of simply walking away, of abandoning everything we had built, left me with a hollow ache in my chest. Sandy stepped closer, her hand hovering near mine as if she wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap between us, but was afraid of being pushed away. "Rolly," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I love you. I've never stopped loving you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." The words cut through me, a bittersweet reminder of what we had once shared. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that love could somehow pull us through this, but the doubt lingered, a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. "I don't know if that's enough," I admitted, my voice barely audible. She nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "Maybe it isn't, but it's all I have, and I'm willing to fight for it, for us, even if it's just a glimmer of hope." For a long moment, we stood there in silence, the distance between us both physical and emotional, a chasm that felt impossible to bridge. But as I looked into her tear-streaked face, I realized that I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. There was too much history between us, too much love, too many memories to simply walk away without a fight. "Okay," I finally said, my voice trembling. "We'll try. But I need time, Sandy. And I need you to be honest with me from now on, no matter how hard it is." She nodded, the relief on her face palpable. "I promise, Rolly. I'll be honest with you, about everything. And I'll wait for as long as it takes." It wasn't a resolution, not by a long shot. But it was a start, a tentative, fragile beginning to what might be the hardest journey we would ever face. I wasn't sure if we could make it, wasn't sure if our love was strong enough to withstand the damage that had been done. But as I looked at Sandy, I knew that I owed it to myself and to the life we had built together to at least try. The weeks that followed were agonizingly slow, each day a battle to keep going, to find a way forward through the wreckage of our lives. Sandy and I existed in a fragile truce, a tentative agreement to try and rebuild what had been shattered. But the truth was, I didn't know how to begin, didn't know if there was even a path to rebuild from. We were like two strangers inhabiting the same space, each of us walking on eggshells, afraid to break the thin veneer of civility that barely held us together. I returned to work, throwing myself into projects, trying to drown out the thoughts that plagued me whenever I was alone. The office became a refuge, a place where I could pretend that everything was normal, even if only for a few hours. My colleagues noticed the change in me, the haunted look in my eyes, the way I seemed to be only half present. But no one said anything, and for that, I was grateful. I wasn't ready to share what had happened, wasn't ready to face the pity or the advice that would inevitably follow. At home, things were different. Sandy was careful around me, always gentle, always trying to make amends in small ways, cooking my favorite meals, leaving little notes for me to find, offering to watch movies together like we used to. I could see the effort she was putting in, the way she was trying to prove her commitment to us, to our marriage. But no matter how hard she tried, no matter how much she said or did, there was always a barrier between us, a wall of pain and mistrust that I couldn't seem to break through. Nights were the hardest. We slept in the same bed, but there was a chasm between us, an invisible line that neither of us dared to cross, I could feel her lying beside me, her body tense, as if she was waiting for some signal from me, some sign that I was ready to move forward. But I wasn't. I couldn't bring myself to touch her, couldn't bring myself to bridge that gap, even though a part of me longed for the intimacy we had once shared. The thought of Leonard haunted me. Even though Sandy had assured me that it was over, that she had cut all ties with him, the images of them together wouldn't leave my mind. Every time I looked at her, I saw him. His hands on her, his lips on her, the connection they had shared behind my back. It poisoned everything, turning every tender moment into something bitter and tainted. One night, after yet another sleepless stretch, I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed, the weight of it all pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. Sandy stirred but didn't say anything, her eyes following me as I walked out of the bedroom and into the living room. I could feel her gaze on my back, could feel the tension that hung in the air between us, but I didn't stop. I needed space, needed to breathe, needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do. I paced the living room, my mind a whirlwind of emotions, anger, sorrow, confusion. I felt like I was being torn apart from the inside, each piece of me pulling in a different direction, leaving me unsure of where to turn, what to do. How had it come to this? How had the life we had built together fallen apart so completely? I thought of the early days of our marriage, the joy and excitement we had shared, the dreams we had built together. And now, all of that seemed so far away, almost like it belonged to another lifetime, another version of us that no longer existed. I didn't hear Sandy approach until she was right behind me. I turned to find her standing there, her eyes filled with tears, her face pale in the dim light of the room. "Rolly," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Please, let's talk. We can't keep doing this. We can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not." I stared at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, the woman who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I wanted to yell at her, to lash out, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she had caused me. But all I felt was an overwhelming sense of exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that made it impossible to hold on to the anger any longer. "There's nothing left to say, Sandy," I said quietly, my voice hollow. "We've been going in circles, trying to fix something that might be beyond repair." She flinched at my words, her tears spilling over as she took a step closer. "I know I've hurt you, Rolly. I know I've destroyed everything we had. But I still believe we can find a way through this. I still believe in us." I shook my head, the sadness in her eyes tearing at me. "Do you? Or are you just trying to hold on to something because you're scared of what comes next?" Sandy's breath hitched, her hands shaking as she reached out to me. "I'm scared, yes, but I'm scared of losing you, Rolly. I'm scared of losing the only thing that's ever truly mattered to me." Her words hit me hard, stirring something deep inside that I had tried to bury. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies, a part of me still cared for her, still loved her. But that love was tangled up with so much pain, so much doubt, that I didn't know if it was enough to save us. "I don't know if I can trust you again," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I can ever look at you without seeing him, without wondering if it will happen again." Sandy nodded, her tears falling freely now. "I understand, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I'm asking you to give us a chance, to give yourself a chance to heal. Maybe we can't go back to what we were, but maybe we can find something new, something stronger. But I can't do it alone, Rolly. I need you with me." The silence that followed was heavy, the weight of her words sinking into me. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that there was still something worth fighting for, but the fear of being hurt again was a powerful force, one that I wasn't sure I could overcome. But as I looked at Sandy, saw the desperation and hope in her eyes, I realized that walking away would be the easiest thing to do, but not necessarily the right one. We had shared so much, built so much together, and to throw it all away felt like giving up not just on her, but on myself as well. I don't know if this will work, I said finally, my voice shaking. But I'm willing to try, Sandy. I'm willing to see if we can find a way through this, together. She let out a choked sob, her relief palpable as she closed the distance between us, wrapping her arms around me in a tentative embrace. I hesitated,